Okay, so normally the first thing I would do on a painting is I would draw a little outline here around the edges, and I totally forgot to do that. And the reason I like to do that is because then I'm like really composing to where my frame is going to cover. And in oil painting, where you don't use a map, the frame kind of constricts your painting. So I like to be sure that I, leave enough room on the edges for stuff, so it doesn't feel like it's just right up against the edge of the frame. So that actually is a really important thing, and I just can't even believe I forgot it, but there you have it. I did forget it. So now I'm just drawing in with some yellow ochre, and I'm just putting in the dark places. And you could do this another way. You could put yellow ochre over the whole thing and then wipe out your lights and then add in your darks, but it doesn't work. That doesn't work as well on gessoed paper, so that's why I'm just doing it with the yellow ochre, putting in the darks. Cat keeps stepping on stuff here. And the next thing that happens is I didn't erase all the things I already had on my camera, so this is going to stop recording before the drawing's really done, but hopefully you can get some sort of idea about it, that like this part, the part of the tree that's in the light, I pretty much just left it all light, and then I'm going to come back and put in the darks to it to give it more volume. So the reason I like to draw like this for painting is because painting is about shapes, especially shapes of light and dark, shapes of color. And by drawing like this, I start to have the sense of how it's going to look as a painting rather than just how it looks as an outline drawing. And that's helpful to me, especially on something like this. I don't always do this. Sometimes I do draw with a pencil. I guess, you can't really say I always do anything, but the most important thing is, oh, there goes the drawing. Okay, so you can see kind of how it ended up, and now I've started putting in the color, and I started with the sky because the sky is the brightest part, and also because when you're doing landscape, the sky really gives you the first big hit of what kind of day it is, and it's a really good plan when you do the sky to also work on the water at the same time. So yeah, I don't know what happened here. Let's see if I can make this better. My camera is like every time I'm filming, I can just film like 15 minutes, and then if my camera moves a little bit while I'm doing other things, you sort of don't get the whole picture, but here it all is. So I started with the sky. I have three things going on my sky. You can't see it very well, but the blue, the dark of the shadows, and the light of the clouds, the dark of the clouds and the light of the clouds. And here I'm putting in the water right away. A really good plan, because since the water is reflecting the sky, they're very similar. So it just kind of helps to do it right now. Have an increasing problem with glare as I worked on this. And then when I do the last 11 minutes on my filming, I move it again, so that makes it a little better about the glare. And I guess I decided to come back and start doing these darks because I wanted to get a sense of light and shadow, and you can see I didn't actually clean my brush very well, so I ended up getting a bunch of, once I got it kind of down past the dark color I picked up, I ended up with a bunch of the cloud colors. Yeah. Also, I'm not sure, maybe that's the glare from the lights. Even though they are photography lights, in the end, I had to point them up at the ceiling, and that seemed to work the best, although things are a little darker. Yeah, I think that was really darker over there. I think that's just glare. And same thing, as I was doing that, I decided I'd go ahead and just do the reflections right away, too, since they're going to be pretty much the same as the color of what's being reflected. In general, reflections are a little darker than what's being reflected, but I don't think they are in this case. So any rules or anything that might sound like a rule to you, it all depends, and it's the kind of thing that if you're thinking, why don't my reflections look like reflections, then you could consider, well, maybe I need to make them darker. But you always want to just look and see what you see. And maybe because the water has a fair amount of movement in it, it all kind of averaged out. So the light and shadow on the trees kind of turned into sort of a medium reflection there. It sounds like I think about stuff. I don't actually really ever think about anything. I just put stuff down and look at it. And you can see that I kind of figured out that I didn't quite have the drawing right back there, that the trees need to be bigger, which is good. And I'm using that scumbling stroke, and I have a bad habit I've had ever since I was a kid, and that you can see how I'm pushing my brush. I do not know where I got this habit, but if you can pull your brush rather than push it, if you can never get into this bad habit of pushing your brush, it's not as hard on your brush. Like that thing of pushing my brush, that's pretty hard on it. And I notice I do the same kind of thing in pastels, that I push across the page instead of pulling back across the page. So I don't know what that's about. But yeah, if you can avoid it, it'll save a little wear and tear on your brushes. And now that's the, I know why I didn't, like maybe, and sometimes I would have wanted to start with that really bright light on those reeds and all, but as you can see, it doesn't show up at all against the greens because I haven't put the green in there. It's just so much like the underpainting I did with the yellow ochre. So one thing I think about especially, I did not think about it here, but in pastels, whatever color paper I'm working on, and I think that might be a good idea in the oils too, whatever tone you have on your paper, paint last whatever is most like your tone. Because like here you can just see it doesn't even show up, so what was the point? So then I decided I better come back and start doing those trees, and now I'm putting in the light on the trees, and I'm just using just that scumbling stroke. And I don't actually mix very much on my palette. Mostly my palette is just some place I use to keep my paint. I just am lifting stuff up and mixing it together on the palette, on the painting. So that's kind of, I guess, an impressionist thing, is to not mix your paint so much as to do as much mixing on the painting, possibly more mixing on the painting than you do on the palette. Wolf Kahn, I took a few classes with him. I don't know if you know his work. He's a colorist of sorts, and he talked about that too, that really his palette was just a place to keep his paint. And almost all his mixing was done on the canvas, and he paints with those utility brushes, like the 2-inch brushes that you buy 6 in a pack for $3, and he just scrubs them on just like this. He doesn't use as much paint as I'm using even. If there's some videos about him on YouTube. His name is Wolf Kahn, K-A-H-N, and I just thought they were so good. You know, I was really glad I got to study with him a little bit, even though he said some amazing things to me, like this is bad in the worst art school way. Even though I was in a class with a bunch of my students, but you know, I'm still not sure what it meant, but I know I did do better the next time. Yeah, so I took his class when I was like really a grown-up, when I'd been an artist for a long time. And so it was good for me, humbling. And so here I'm just trying to come back and restate my darks even darker. And that's kind of a theme all through here, because see, I can't yet make my lights look really light. So one way to make your lights lighter is to make your darks darker. And then of course to cover up all that yellow underpainting. You want to be a little careful what you choose to your ground or your underpainting, or sometimes it's called imprimatura, or it could be called a griselle. If it's too dark, there's this thing that happens that paint over time gets more transparent, and those darks will come through your paint. So it's nice to work on a really dark ground because everything looks really brilliant right away, but it's not the best technique because of that, although, you know, you could choose not to worry about that stuff. I don't know. I don't worry anymore. But so I used to paint on a ground that was a mixture of burnt sienna and Prussian blue. That was what one teacher I had used. But those paintings weren't impressionistic. When I studied with him, he was not an impressionist. He was much more of a tonal painter, kind of a Rembrandt sort of guy, David Lafell. And I don't know, then I just started, for me, a lot of times I do work indoors under electric light, and that yellow ochre is a nice kind of warm feeling right away of kind of reminiscent of electric light. And David, he has a Northlit studio, so it's very dark. And so really for him, the Prussian blue and burnt sienna is probably, just the perfect thing. And then my teacher that I studied most of my landscape with, he used a different tone depending on the quality of the day. So like on a gray day, he might use a tone that was kind of violet. And on a sunny day, he might use something like cadmium yellow. A sunset, he might use cad orange. Yeah, I guess we're just going to sit here and contemplate that for a minute. So the good thing is I learned a lot by doing this demonstration, and I'll definitely, so here you see I've got my lights better now. I didn't change anything in the painting between those two shots. This is exactly the same situation. I just pointed the light up at the ceiling. And I was going to come back to the sky and try to restate that. But you can see at this point I've got there's a little green in my brush there's a lot of green in my brush that I didn't really get out, even though I tried to wash it really carefully. If this gets dry between now and next class, I might try to work on it again, but otherwise I'll finish this or continue this demonstration on Saturday. And it'd be nice if I could film it. Maybe I can film it for the person who's not going to be there this week. So I'm using quite a bit of paint, even though I talked about, keeping it thin. That first time over was thin, but this time over I'm using quite a bit more paint. And I'm doing a little drawing, as you can see, cutting in with the sky to make the shapes of the trees a little better. But the great time to redraw is when you first come back to your painting, when your eye is fresh, and you haven't been staring at the whole thing for so long. That's what makes teaching painting or drawing so easy, is that so much easier than painting, actually, because, I'm not staring at people's work the whole time. I'm coming around and I'm seeing it from a distance as I walk up toward them, and that really allows me to see what things are out of relationship to others. And then the way I paint, that's what I'm really looking for, is I'm trying to consider, what is the color of that cloud in shadow compared to the color of the sky. As I mentioned, I don't use black. Sometimes I use Payne's gray, but I don't actually have black on and I didn't have Payne's gray on my palette. So I'm making my grays with complementary colors and violets. And when I look at a gray, what I try to do is say, well, what kind of gray is it? Is it a purple gray, a greenish gray, a bluish gray? And start with that. And then I can always dull it down later. So my general approach to painting is start as fresh as I can, and then if it needs to be knocked down, I can do that. I think it's easier to knock stuff down than to make it stronger later. I can't believe nobody's interrupted me yet. Any minute now somebody's going to, I'm sure.
Am I here to
Yeah, you're here to interrupt me, aren't you? I'm filming.
Okay. I was just
I'm
wondering-
not really hungry.
Okay, because she's making burritos if you want that instead.
All right, that's fine. I guess I'm having a burrito for dinner. Lucky me. I just keep working. Other people feed me. All right, so now I'm back to the water. And I'm trying to use enough paint that you don't hear the sound of my brush on the paper. And I've stripped out that. I'm doing a voiceover, so I've stripped out the sound that the brush was making. But I just could feel my brush like being worn out. So I kept trying to use more paint. Yeah, so that's all. I did in this next 11 minutes that I'm filming, since I changed the lights, I did cover the whole thing again, and I really have a lot of paint on it now, so you know, I couldn't really keep going. That's why I have to work on more than one painting at a time, because I'm a little reckless and things get really you know, wet, and then I can't really work on them again unless I would have switched to palette knife right now. I could have worked on it more, but this takes a lot of time to do this. So and I didn't really plan on using this kind of time during the week. Although I'm really glad I'm doing it for you, because I'm feeling much better about coming to class and not trying to do, only being able to get this far like in a 30-minute demo. So like now I'm just picking up like pure cadmium and just putting it on there. Pure cadmium and white. And you can see my drawing's a little exaggerated. Everything's a little wonko. And then I add a little green to this, so it wouldn't be quite as yellow as the bush, as the reeds there. But I want to keep, like, because it's a sunny day, like one of the characteristics of a sunny day is that there's a lot of contrast between the light and dark. So I'm putting the lights on this tree. This tree is where you really see it, because this is where the sun is shining the most directly. I'm trying to keep those dark areas dark. And now I'm adding in what would be considered the half light, and anything that's rounded has to have light, dark, but also half light. If something's like a square or a house, then there'll be a dark side and a light side, but anything that has like a rounded form is going to have light, dark, and at least half light, and probably more variations than that. So that's what I started out with, was light and shadow, and then I started putting in those half lights. So I find it really, really important to put the lights where they go and put the darks where they go, and not sort of start with some sort of average when there's a strong contrast. Like some of the places in this painting, there's more averages because the sun's not quite shining as strongly on those places, like back here in the trees, the far trees. There is light and shadow, but it's not in direct sunlight. And now I think I'm using a little red or purple in there, something to get that to be darker. Also, I did manipulate this photograph in Photoshop a little bit. I punched up the light on the tree in front, and I mean, that's how it was. That's real sunlight, but I punched it up a little bit on the tree and the reeds there. You see right there, what I just love about these round bristle brushes is how I'm able to make a stroke Like I can keep scumbling, but I can also pull it like a stroke. And it's funny because I always pull my brush strokes from left to right. It's just a scumbling thing. Anyway, you'd think I could fix that problem, but I don't seem to be able to. Oh yeah, now I just noticed that there's reflections there. So I find it kind of remarkable the things I don't see in the beginning because I'm trying to simplify so much. I don't believe you can simplify light and dark, like on that one tree, but other things, it's so complicated. This is a very busy scene, and so I just didn't even see that until right then when I put it in. For better or worse, I don't know. In a minute, I'm going to put this little bit of light on the water, and I do kind of wonder if I should have done it sooner, but it turns out okay. And the reason why you might do a highlight like that sooner is just that you want to be sure that everything else is dark enough that you can make that kind of a highlight. And since I was able to, then everything else must have been dark enough. And obviously this isn't the last time over, but even though that seems like a detail, that little stroke in the water, it's kind of a marker. It's a marker for the values for me. And then I thought, I think there's some kind of tan color in those clouds too. I don't know. So anything that crosses my mind, I do. And I think right then I realized I didn't think that was true once I did it, but also it was starting to plow the paint a little bit. And some of you guys had a little trouble with that too, that things just get so wet. And especially on the first time over, your brush just goes right down through that layer of paint and starts lifting it off instead of adding more on. So I think what I decided to do is try to just get every place with a kind of an equal amount of paint on it. So in the beginning of a painting like this, I try to move toward the finish at an even rate where everything is getting finished kind of at the same rate of speed. Nothing is really getting ahead. And then at some point, as things get more toward a finished point, I'll stop working on everything like this, and I'll pick some areas that I'm going to finish more to make them be little centers of interest. Or, as I like to think of them, little jewel-like places in the painting where people would love to have their eyes linger. Yes, it's silly, but that's kind of how I think. And I usually don't have one center of interest in a painting. I usually try to move the viewer's eye through the painting and have different places that are little spots that they can rest. And I just try to keep the person in my painting, not let anything happen that would lead them out of the painting. So if I had done there, so there's that little highlight on the water, and I felt like that was okay. Like maybe the clouds aren't dark enough, but I can definitely fix that.